Not every new video game franchise meets with success, especially if it's just not very good. Even though some of these might be better off forgotten, here are some games that turned out so bad they had to cancel the sequel. Developer Rare has produced some of the most beloved games of all time, including GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, and Perfect Dark. The latter was a kind of spiritual successor to their legendary 007 game, a first-person shooter for the Nintendo 64 at a time when console shooters were rare as hen's teeth. Featuring a zany science fiction espionage plot and a cool new protagonist in Joanna Dark, Perfect Dark became one of the N64's last breakout titles, releasing during the console's fading years.
Something I can do for you, old woman?
Return our sapient immediately! You don't know what you're doing!
Yes, I do. I'm leaving.
Then in 2002, Microsoft pulled off a fast one by poaching Rare from Nintendo. The Seattle tech titan had a new console out, the Xbox, and they needed developers for it. With Halo Combat Evolved, they'd proved that shooters could thrive on consoles, so Rare and their in-development prequel to Perfect Dark made perfect sense for their lineup. In the end, the new game Perfect Dark Zero proved so ambitious that they had to transition it into an Xbox 360 title instead. It arrived as a launch game for that system, and after all that, somehow the game still didn't turn out very well. While not necessarily terrible, it didn't live up to the first game's sterling reputation. It was simply a good enough shooter, not a breakout sensation like Rare's previous efforts. In a world where Halo existed, that wasn't enough to stand out. In fact, over time the game's star has only faded further. It even made game trailers list of top 10 worst sequels. Ouch. Rare has never made a Perfect Dark game, or indeed any shooter, since.
Doesn't everybody deserve a second chance?
The answer to that question evidently is a big NO. The Walt Disney Company is a monster of the entertainment industry, which bestrides the earth with franchise studios like Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Pixar. Yet, once upon a time, Disney was most famous for a creation of the man himself, Mickey Mouse. In 2006, Mickey returned to screens in video game form in Epic Mickey, a game designed by industry legend Warren Spector. For all the hype around the mouse's comeback, the final product didn't review all that well. Critics found it repetitive and shallow, despite the fantastic representation of early Disney charm. Disney just wouldn't be Disney if it didn't knock out a sequel, and so Epic Mickey 2: The Power of Two arrived in 2012. Unfortunately, something clearly went wrong somewhere in development. The sequel suffered dismal reviews, since it fixed none of the issues with the first game and somehow managed to make the whole thing even less fun. Mickey Mouse and his friends might be great characters, but a bad game is simply a bad game. Epic Mickey 2 is a lesson in trying to coast off the strength of an intellectual property and failing. After disappointing sales of the sequel, Disney closed developer Junction Point Studios, and with it, any hope of an Epic Mickey 3. Perhaps someday Mickey Mouse will make a triumphant return and prove to the world how he built a little company into the greatest force in entertainment. Now that would be pretty epic. From the first Metal Gear's release in 1987 until the launch of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain in 2015, Hideo Kojima always had a hand in the series. Unfortunately, that all changed when Kojima and the company he spent decades working for, Konami, had a very public breakup. After Kojima's departure from Konami, some wondered if there would ever be another Metal Gear game, or if the fifth mainline entry was the last. There was also some concern about what a Metal Gear title without Kojima might look like. And as it turns out, that concern was well warranted. Metal Gear Survive arrived in early 2018 as an attempt to combine the video game zombie craze with the Metal Gear license. The reviews were pretty poor, with Survive only managing to attain a Metascore of 60. Perhaps this title was an attempt by Konami to cash in on the Metal Gear name, and a way for the company to see how fans would react to a Kojima-led project. The answer: Survive is arguably the worst Metal Gear game ever and may have destroyed the brand for good. The original Fear Effect for the Sony PlayStation was a campy sort of affair with more mature tones and was good enough to get a well-received sequel. It's unclear why Fear Effect disappeared for a while after the franchise's second entry, as there was almost certainly room for a third installment at least. But when 2018's Fear Effect Sedna was announced, fans of the series breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, Fear Effect was back. Not so much. Fear Effect Sedna was a total flop, registering a score of 50 on Metacritic while becoming the target of harsh words from numerous critics. Game Informer called it a, quote, mess of broken gameplay, system-breaking bugs, and slapdash narrative.
Not a warm welcome.
Take a look around. What'd you expect?
A remake of the original Fear Effect was announced in 2017 with plans to launch in 2018, and fans at least had that to look forward to. At this point, it's possible that Sedna was so bad that it not only killed off the potential for a new entry, but the release of that remake as well. The latter still hasn't come out as of early spring 2021. The first Afro Samurai game wasn't terrible per se. It was no masterpiece, but it was fun enough for the franchise's fans. But something clearly went wrong when the sequel, released years later, changed both developers and publishers. Afro Samurai 2 is a prime example of why that particular tactic is not a good idea, as fans likely had some expectations, and those definitely were not met. Afro Samurai 2 received some of the worst review scores on record, and there's nothing to indicate the game didn't deserve them. Afro Samurai 2 earned a dismal 21 on Metacritic, by far one of the lowest scores on the site. To make matters worse, what came out of Afro Samurai 2 was just its first episode. There was supposed to be more on the way. After seeing how poorly the game was received by fans and critics, the team behind it cancelled all remaining episodes and actually pulled the game from sale entirely. When you consider the way Afro Samurai went out, it's tough to see a third entry coming to the series.
Mom, I want a new Mega Man game,
the child exclaimed.
We already have Mega Man at home,
the mother replied, reminding the child about his unopened copy of Mighty No. 9. Yes, it's true that Mega Man and Mighty No. 9 are not part of the same franchise, and the only thing connecting them is legendary game designer Keiji Inafune. Still, those thirsty for a new entry in the Mega Man series had hoped Mighty No. 9 would fill that void with some of the same platforming action. Sadly, it wasn't meant to be, and in the immortal words of its god-awful trailer, it had gamers everywhere saying,
"Why are you doing this to me?"
When Mighty No. 9 released in the middle of 2016, it did so with a whimper, receiving a score of 52 on Metacritic. Before the game's release, Keiji Inafune spoke optimistically about Mighty No. 9 potentially becoming another Mega Man in terms of success and relevance. He wanted there to be more games after the first. Years later, a follow-up still hasn't materialized, and one can't help but assume that's because Mighty No. 9 was such a disappointment. Relic Entertainment is among the most prestigious strategy game creators in the business. Warhammer 40,000, Dawn of War, and Dawn of War 2 were both successful games, but for very different reasons. In fact, although they shared the same title, the two games were nothing like each other. The first was a conventional base-building real-time strategy game, while the second was a squad-focused real-time tactics experience. So for the follow-up, Dawn of War 3, Relic decided to combine both playstyles into one, while simultaneously incorporating ideas from the popular MOBA genre. Like StarCraft 2, Dawn of War 3 featured 3 unique playable factions. These all included individual hero units with different abilities, which would center the battles around these characters from the narrative. However, that narrative proved to be weaker than in previous games, and the balance of army strategy and hero tactics simply never gelled into a solid game. Relic's previous Dawn of War games all got massive expansion packs that were, for all intents and purposes, full sequels. They had entirely new campaigns and new units added to each faction's rosters. Dawn of War 3 had the same roadmap, but unfortunately, poor sales forced Relic to cancel any future work on the expansions. Their goal of crossing over MOBA, strategy, and tactics players ended up appealing to none of them. And now the title is dead. Where Relic goes from here is anybody's guess. Yep, unfortunately, it's that time again.
Hail to the king, baby.
It's true, Duke Nukem Forever took a very long time to release. Starting way back in 1996, the game suffered endless restarts and directional shifts, until at long last, its developer 3D Realms went out of business. And yet, Duke lived, unfortunately. Gearbox Software, a studio known for, actually finishing games, took on the project. They polished up what 3D Realms had done and formally launched the finished game in 2011. The head of Gearbox Software, Randy Pitchford, explained that he, quote, did not acquire the franchise merely so people could experience Duke Nukem Forever, which means that he wanted more Duke games down the road. But Forever was not a commercial success. In fact, it tanked hard. Pitchford would later credit this to the fact that Forever had just trod the same ground that Duke Nukem 3D had decades earlier. Despite his wishes for a Duke-centered franchise, Gearbox hasn't announced any new games. Duke Nukem espouses a certain kind of masculinity that doesn't translate very well to the modern era. Crass, womanizing, and unsophisticated. Maybe it's possible to evolve the character in some way that wouldn't alienate long-term fans, but honestly, we could be waiting a very long time for that. Maybe forever.
Guess he won't be in the sequel.
Yeah, well, he's not the only one, Dukey. In the 1990s, a new genre of video game was emerging, more interested in giving the players some control over the narrative rather than serving them constant action scenes. These games leaned into their cinematic influences by creating the entire game out of full-motion video, or FMV.
Careful, stranger. You ought not to go sneaking up on folks out here in the dark. Well, this is Gold Rush country.
FMV was effectively just recorded footage of actors, with the video quality kicked down to fit onto game consoles and PCs of the time. Night Trap, a teen horror game where the player tried to defend some helpless co-eds by springing traps on their assailants, became the most famous of this style.
You see, Lieutenant, we were trying to help the unfortunate augurs.
Augurs?
Those are those things that were chasing us around the house trying to get our blood.
But fame isn't always a good thing. Night Trap drew the attention of the United States Congress, as parents began to realize how violent these kids' games were getting. Under scrutiny, publisher Sega decided to pull the game from stores. Though Night Trap would eventually be ported to other consoles, the whole FMV genre waned over the next few years. But the creators of Night Trap still believed in their vision, and 20 years later, a Kickstarter campaign tried to bring their game back to life. Part of their promise was an idea for a Night Trap sequel, which they hoped would energize their fanbase after so much time. But it didn't. The campaign barely made 10% of its financing goal. Night Trap, it turns out, wasn't so beloved after all. It has ranked on various worst games lists over the years. In this case, gamers voted with their wallets, and made sure the sequel never came. Castlevania Lords of Shadow was a pleasant surprise of 2010. A westernized 3D update of the classic 2D series, Lords of Shadow married the gothic atmosphere and slick action of Castlevania with the close-up and fast-paced style of God of War. What's more, Konami gave the development team a boost by bringing no less than Hideo Kojima into the mix. The result was a superlative action game dripping with fantastic art design. It seemed like the long-dormant Castlevania would at last rise from its coffin and sink its fangs into the modern gaming scene. Then came Lords of Shadow 2 in 2014. And, oh boy, whatever secret sauce went into the first game had apparently dried up by the second. The game received virtually no promotion prior to its launch, itself a sign of trouble. The sequel had a different director, who allegedly was a nightmare to work for, and Kojima was not involved in any way this time. If that first game was lightning in a bottle, the sequel was a cold guy standing in the rain holding up a bottle, hoping for lightning to strike twice. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 was butchered by critics. Since then, there's been no sign of another Lords of Shadow game. Castlevania is a beloved franchise and may get another reboot someday, but the dream of a long-running, high-quality franchise that the first game promised was never realized.